have everybody here. Glad to have you here in the physical location. Glad to have you if you're watching online, wherever you might be. Welcome to our class on the Gospel of Matthew. We've been going through it for several weeks, a few months, I guess. Probably if I went back and looked, that's what we would conclude. We're in chapter 22. Now come on in, get a good place. Glad to see everybody. Glad to get some rain. In our house, we have, there are various things that give off light. And so when I lay down in bed at night, there's enough light you can see almost everywhere in the house. Well, I have a ceiling fan right above the bed. If it sounds like I'm talking like I'm the only one there, well, Debbie's gone this weekend, so it was just me last night. But I woke up in the middle of the night and it was pitch black and the ceiling fan was off. And well, what's going on? I got one of those little clocks that projects the time, the numbers up on the ceiling so I can lay in bed. That's how lazy I am. I don't want to roll over and look at a clock. I just want to lay there and look up and see the numbers. And all that was gone. Power was off at our house for a while. Anybody else have a power go off at your house? Okay. So I got up and I had just gotten a brand new headlamp, just like the one I have, because the one I have has lasted for years, and it's got a green light, a bright green light. It's great. It doesn't take away your night vision when you're outside at night. Anyway, and I just had that right there, so I picked it up, got my phone, called the power company, and by the time I got to go through all the steps you got to go through to contact the power company, the lights came back on. So I don't know why I told you that. I think it was the storms and the rain. It's good to have rain. But hopefully in our studies some lights will come on this morning. That's what we do it for. We're going to be finishing up chapter 22. I need somebody to read 34 through 46. 34 through 46 in chapter 22. Larry's got that. And then I need somebody to start chapter 23 for us, chapter 23 verses 1 to 12. Who would like to do that? 1 to 12, Matthew chapter 23. All right, Harold, very good. Let's get back into our study on Matthew. Chapter 22, verses 34 through the end of the chapter. Yes.
But when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered themselves together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question. What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He said to them, then how does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet. If David then calls him Lord, how is he his son? No one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day on to ask him another question.
Then Jesus spoke to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore all that they tell you, do observe, but do nothing according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. And they tie up heavy loads and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men, for they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. And they love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues, and respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and they call by men Rabbi. But do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, who is in heaven. And do not be called leaders, for one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. And whosoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted.
Thank you both. Where is Jesus? Where's all this apparently taking place? In the city of Jerusalem. He's come to Jerusalem. By the way, why has he come to Jerusalem? By this time, he's come there in order to die. He's come to Jerusalem because the crucifixion is about to take place. It's just a couple days away. In Jerusalem, where has he been? Where's his teaching been taking place? In the temple. In the temple. He's in the temple in Jerusalem. And what we see is what we've seen before in verse 34. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, what'd they do? They gathered themselves together. They huddled up. You seen them huddle up before? Sure we have. The Sadducees just did this, just prior to this. They huddled up. They came to Jesus in verse 23 and they questioned him. Man, we got a question we want to ask you. They've huddled up and got this question. You saw it back up in verse 15 of chapter 22. The Pharisees went and they plotted together. How do you plot together? You can see them just like in a football huddle. All right, how are we going to do it? What are we going to say? And that's what they're continually doing. It's just so ridiculous. It's so silly to imagine them always getting together to bring this man's demise. And what's this man doing the whole time? He's healing people. He's teaching. What's wrong with his teaching? The only thing wrong with his teaching is it makes them look bad. That's the only thing wrong with it. Why does it make them look bad? Because he teaches as one with authority. Why are they teaching? They like to be seen of men as those who have authority, as great men of God, as pious men, standing on the street corners. Jesus brought this all up in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't stand on the street corner and pray. Where do you go when you pray? You go to your closet, and what do you do with the door? You shut that door, and you pray to the Lord in secret. How about your alms when you're giving away things to help people, to be benevolent, to be generous? Where do the Pharisees do that? They not only do it out in public, Jesus said they blow trumpets. Everybody gather around, watch me do this great thing. It's interesting. I see a lot of this on Facebook. Somebody's doing something really nice for somebody else, but there's somebody there with a camera. How'd that camera guy get there? And I like these programs where they're redoing a house, and then people come into the house and they see it for the first time, and they act like they're the only ones there. But you know, they're coming into the door. Oh, this is really nice. And who are they talking to? Well, they're talking to the cameraman. The cameraman's right there. How can they be taking a picture if there's no camera? It's really interesting, and that's dishonesty is part of humanity, and these guys have it in spades. So, what's the question here at the end of chapter 22? What's the greatest commandment? You catch the irony of the answer? What is the answer? The greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, body. Who are they talking to when they ask this question? They're talking to God. This is God's Son. He is divine, just as divine as the Father is divine.
Wow.
You
they
would
just
think.
kept on, and he always came back. And they just never did get it, did
They never did get it. It even says in verse 34, when they heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, oh man, he's put them to silence. What was the question that the Sadducees asked? Well, it was about life after death. And they were trying to trip him up. Oh yeah, who's this guy going to be married to after he's had, or who's this woman going to be married to after she's had all these husbands? And hey, there's no marriage in the afterlife. Not given her in marriage. And then he brings up Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he makes a point that God, he doesn't say God was the God of Abraham when Abraham was alive. He said God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He makes a point on that tense of that word. And here, he's making a point that the greatest commandment is that upon which what hangs, what rests, what depends on the greatest commandment. The entire law. Everything you read in the law comes back to this command and its second. Love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as yourself. And Paul even points this out in Romans chapter 13. He says, if you love your neighbor, what are you going to do to him that would be breaking the law? Well, nothing if you love your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, you're going to do everything possible that's good for your neighbor. Christians are the best neighbors anybody can have if they're behaving as actual Christians. I brought this up before because it impressed me when somebody asked me, you're driving through a strange town at night and everything looks kind of sketchy and you're not sure about where you are and your car stops. Oh man, my car stopped in a bad neighborhood. What am I going to do? And you get out and you pop the hood and you're looking at it and you hear somebody coming and you look across and in the shadows you see four great big hunking guys coming at you. Not hunky like good looking, but I mean great big hulking guys. We'll call them hulking guys. Oh man. Oh, I'm dead. This is the end of me right here. But then they come close enough for you to see, and you see they've got Bibles tucked under their arm. What happens in your mind? Oh, I'm okay. These guys are going to help me. Even the most rank atheist, I'm sure, would probably think that. Because the Bible is a symbol of goodness, of rightness, of love. And when people are interested enough in the Bible to carry it with them, man. And so Jesus is saying on these two commands, everything that's in the law and the prophets depends. And then he asks this question. It says in verse 41, while the Pharisees were gathered together, oh, you asked me a question, let me ask you one. What's his question? Whose son is the Messiah? He's not asking them as if they believe he is the Christ. He's saying, in a sense, I believe, you're looking for the Messiah, you're looking for the Christ. By the way, Christ, what's it mean? Same thing as Messiah. Messiah means anointed one of God. They were looking for the anointed one of God to come and save them. The word Christ is just a Greek word that means Messiah. Same thing. So he's saying, when the Messiah comes, whose son's he going to be? What'd they say? Son of David. Was that right? Well, that was absolutely right. That was the prophecy. God promised David, from your loins, I'm going to raise up a king to sit on the throne. Now, he was talking in one sense about Solomon, but more importantly, he was talking about raising up Christ to sit on the eternal throne. And so he was David's son. And then he brings this up. Then how does David, in the Spirit... By the way, what does that say about what David wrote? Guided by the Spirit. David, guided by the Spirit, so says Jesus, the Son of God. I think we can take his word for it. He writes, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet. It's the restraint of Jesus, not just pointing out, and you guys are the enemies that are going to be put beneath my feet. He doesn't do that. That's what this is all about. But he simply asks, if David calls him Lord, how is he his son? If the Christ is the son of David, how does David then refer to the Christ as his Lord? That's his question. What was their answer? They didn't have one. They didn't have one. Jesus does this over and over and over. It's like the gospel writers are showing us Jesus doing these things to build everything to a climactic point where what's going to happen? He's going to die. He's making enough people angry with him by all these horrible things he's doing. What horrible things is he doing? He's showing them up for who they are by speaking the truth. He's telling the truth, and he's showing everybody that's listening, everybody that's watching, everybody who's reading this 2,000 years later what, I can't say that in the Bible class, can I? What dishonest men these guys are. Now, I look at them and I think, oh, yeah, those guys are horrible. But is there any inkling of Phariseeism in you or me? Is there any inkling of Sadduceeism in you or me? Are there some things that we want to hold to our own and we really don't want to surrender them over to Jesus and to his truth? Because, I practice that, and I know I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to do that. And it's really the same thing, isn't it? Isn't it? We huddle up with myself, with yourself. How can I hold on to this and not let it go? And Jesus is saying, no, you can't hold on to that. You've got to die to yourself. You've got to be crucified. Oh, wait a minute. That's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to be crucified, and then I'm going to expect you to be crucified to yourself. And we still struggle with that. So I judge these guys in one sense, and in another sense, in judging them, I judge myself. Because there's some of that in me, some of that in you, and we're trying to rid ourselves of it, to move away from it. But man, it's hard when you're in the flesh, isn't it? Self-justification. Wisdom is justified of all her children. That's what Solomon says, and that's what we do. My wisdom, I can justify myself. How do people justify the atrocities of World War II? Any war, really, but perhaps World War II we know better than the others. Well, just following orders. These people are lesser people than we are, and we have to exterminate them. The Jews were persecuted. One of the crazy reasons, well, they're the ones that killed the Christ. Yeah, so you're going to behave like the devil to kill people that you say crucified Christ? It was all a lie. It was all trumped up. That's the way of the world. Why was Jesus crucified? Trumped up lies, same thing. And we're seeing him interacting with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders of the day, and things are coming to a head where they're going to say, we have got to get rid of this guy. Chapter 23, he turns from the Sadducees and the Pharisees and he addresses the crowds. But who's he talk about? Scribes and the Pharisees, they've seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Everything they tell you to do, do it and observe it. But what are they not supposed to do? Don't do according to their deeds. You do what they teach you the law says, but don't you do what they say or what they do, because what they're doing is wrong. And then he starts going into detail about the things that they do and their attitude, their ungodliness, their hypocrisy. You suppose any of the Sadducees, the scribes, the Pharisees, suppose any of those guys are hearing this stuff? If they're not hearing it, if they're not there to hear it from Jesus' mouth, don't you know they're going to hear it from people who come and say, you know what Jesus said about you? What does all this mean? Do not be called rabbi. Don't call anyone on earth your father. Don't be called leaders. What's he mean by all that? Are we supposed to take that literally? Never refer to anybody as a leader? Never call anybody your father?
He's telling them, make sure you know where your information's coming from.
Okay.
To God and not these other people.
All right? If you have been born into this world, guess what you have? You have a soul, but I'm getting a little more basic. You have a father. You have somebody who sired you, if you will. There was a man involved, and that person, that man, is your father. And when you read through the Bible, you see all kinds of godly men referring to their dads as fathers. I don't believe Jesus is saying don't ever refer to anybody as father literally, but he's saying this. Don't be putting yourself or anybody up on a pedestal, spiritually or religiously speaking. If you're following somebody who's been given the gift of leadership, guess what that person is? They are a leader. And if you call them a leader, you're not doing wrong unless you do it in the sense in which Jesus is saying. Who is your leader? Christ, Jesus Christ. Now, if you see somebody doing good, doing well, speaking good, speaking well, and you say, I'm going to follow them, then you have made yourself a follower of someone and they become your leader. They've led you. That's good. That's right. That's the way it's supposed to be. Jesus isn't saying that's wrong to refer to them as leaders. He's saying you start vaunting yourself up, taking on titles. I really like the title Rev because I think it stands for rest, eat, and visit. But where does that come from? What does reverend mean? One who's to be revered. Really? I wonder if those guys think about that when they wear that title. Who is to be revered? Only God. Only God. If they thought about it, I'm sure they would say to them, you know, that's pretty audacious of me to take on the title of reverend. Priest. There was a time when certain men held the priesthood, and they alone. But now every believer is a priest. And to take that title upon yourself.
Whenever you're growing up and you're studying this, and you're not necessarily sitting in a classroom like this where you bring the rest of this out, Jesus said, you know, whoever's the least of you shall be the greatest. Basically, if you're a leader, you're going to be a servant. And when you think about the world and how we respond to other people, and then you think in your mind that I've got to be careful not to do this, like calling someone a fool or referring to someone as a father, it's so literal, and then you think you modeled your reactions to not do that, and then you start to look deeper into the Word, and you start to gain a better understanding, you know. And so, I don't know, I mean, literally or better understood. I have a tendency to stick to the literal because that's what it says.
Right.
I struggled with this. Like, if I had I used to work with a bunch of guys that were Masons. Of course, you know, you get to be one, ask one, and they would ask you, you know, you'd ask them about it, and then they'd start explaining it to you, and then you'd say, we have a most worshipful master. We call him most worshipful master. And I said, I cannot be a Mason because I'm not going to refer to that person as most worshipful master because of exactly what we're studying right now.
Right.
I just, their stop signs are going up. And then they asked me, why can't you do that? I said, I can't proceed any further because of this reverence that you're giving to this person.
Right. Well, there's a couple of passages that help me to understand the real, what I think is the real meaning of this. For example, when Timothy is referred to by Paul as his son in the faith. Well, if Timothy is Paul's son in the faith, what would that automatically make Paul? It could be said, Timothy could rightly say, well, he's my father in the faith. So he's categorizing the relationship that father is there, and it's no more than the fact that I've been birthed into Christ through this man who taught me the gospel. That's what that's all about. And then in the last chapter of Hebrews, chapter 13, the writer says, he refers to those who lead you. Give respect to those who lead you as those who are looking after your soul. So if somebody's leading them, they must be leaders. So I think Jesus is talking more than about just the literal aspect of calling someone your father. Obviously, there's the wrong context to call somebody a father. But Paul did write to the Galatians, and he said, if you are in Christ, you are children of, not children of God like we might think, but we are children of God. But he said, you are children of Abraham. You're Abraham's children. If we're Abraham's children, according to Galatians 3, then there's a sense in which Abraham is our father. Well, he's our father in the faith, but he's not our father in the sense that we owe everything to him. And there's a relationship that Jesus Christ gives us with other men that is always sacred and sanctified and right and good and wholesome. But these other relationships that we make on our own, calling somebody reverend, somebody to be revered, somebody to be a worshipful master, somebody, I'm going to call him father. I never met him before today, but he's a religious leader, so I'm going to call him father. That's the kind of thing Jesus was talking about. Making people your standard who shouldn't be your standard. But it's always right to follow those, like Paul would say, pattern yourselves after me. Do as I do. Good point, though. Yes, Steve.
Be imitators of me as I follow Christ, or as I imitate Christ.
Yes.
That in that sense.
Yes. And today, we can see Christ in the Scriptures, but we don't see him physically. We don't hear his voice. But we hear and see people who teach us the gospel. And those we imitate as we see them imitating Christ. It's kind of like when he said, if your hand or your eye or your foot offends you, what are you supposed to do? Cut that baby off, because everybody knows if you pluck your eye out, you'll stop sinning. Well, maybe not. If you cut your hand off, you won't do anything wrong anymore. I'm not so sure about the logic and the reason there. What was Jesus talking about? He's saying, this is extreme. You better take it in hand and do something about it. That's what Jesus is saying to us. Because we know that cutting off parts of our body is not going to resolve spiritual issues. But he's making that point with that hyperbole, if you will. It's an extreme statement to make a point. We good? Everybody got anything else on that? Observations, commentary? Okay. The greatest among you shall be your servant. And that is not what the Pharisees were practicing. That's not what the scribes practiced. That's not what the Sadducees practiced. They practiced the very opposite. Whoever exalts himself, this is chapter 23, verse 12, he's going to be humbled. But whoever humbles himself, what's going to happen? Somebody has to be there to exalt him, and guess who that somebody will be? It will always be God. When you read what Paul wrote about Jesus in the 2nd chapter of Ephesians, it says, Jesus humbled himself unto death, therefore God has given him a name, which is what? It is above every name. So Jesus is our pattern for humility. He humbled himself even to the point of death, even death on the cross. And God responded by exalting him with a name higher than any other name. And so that pattern is what Jesus is talking about here. You humble yourself, God's going to exalt you too. And then he starts this series of woes, verse 13. We haven't read this. But man, he starts laying it on. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Ouch. You think he waited until they left the room? You shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, for you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who were coming or entering in to go in. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. You travel around in sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Whoa. Oh, man. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it's nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools and blind men. Wow. Verse 23, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. You tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you've neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice, mercy, faithfulness. You blind guides, verse 24, who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, verse 25, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but what about the inside? You're full of robbery and what else? Self-indulgence. Man, ease up a little, Jesus. You can't preach that hard. People won't want to listen to you. Your church is going to shrink up. Nobody's going to want that. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, in verse 27. You're like whitewashed tombs. On the outside, you appear beautiful, but inside, what do you got? Corruption, dead men's bones, all uncleanness. According to the law, if you touched anything that was dead, you were unclean for a certain time period. And he's saying you're full of what's dead. But you're pretty on the outside. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Verse 29, you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous. And you say, if we'd been living in the days of our fathers, we'd not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you going to escape the sins of hell? Man, he's stomping on toes. He's kicking them in the teeth. Man. Verse 34. He says, I'm sending you prophets. I'm sending you wise men. I'm sending you scribes. Who are the prophets? Who are the wise men? Who are the scribes that Jesus is sending? The apostles, the disciples, those inspired with the Spirit who wrote down the New Testament of Jesus Christ, those are the ones. Some of them you'll kill and crucify. Some of them you'll scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. What's that sound like? That sounds like the book of Acts. That's a book of Acts. Truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets, you stone those who were sent to you. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Your house is being left to you desolate. I say to you, from now on, you'll not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Starting tonight, I was going to make it one lesson, but I think now I'm going to make it two because there's just a lot of material. I'm going to have some discussion over what Jesus says about the demise of Jerusalem, how he foretells what's going to happen before it happens, and then how it's going to happen, and when it's going to happen, the time frame in which Jerusalem will be destroyed. And then we're going to go to a fellow by the name of Titus Flavius Josephus, and we're going to see what he has to say about the destruction of Jerusalem and how he perfectly corroborates, even though that's not what he's trying to do, everything Jesus says here and what Jesus is about to say in Matthew 24 about how horrible things are going to be. What I'm going to give you is going to be a very, condensed version, the Reader's Digest version, because if you read Flavius Josephus, he gets into such detail about the horrors of being in Jerusalem during the siege of both Vespasian and Titus. It's sickening, but you're going to love it. The reason I say that, you're going to see, wow, everything Jesus said is just exactly like Josephus said, and look at that. And that's the way God's always done it. Tom?
Yeah. One thing I was going to mention, I think this is one of the biggest traps as far as Christians.
I'm sorry?
I think this part is one of the biggest traps as far as Christians that we fall into. Just being a Christian and judging other people, judging them by the clothes they wear, judging them by who they are, how much money they make. We are, even as Christians, people tend to be very judgmental of other people, and I've seen it in churches. I've seen it, but yet, we'll sit here, and amen everything that the preacher's saying, but yet we're not looking internally.
Exactly.
And I've seen it where even, Church of Christ, where people will refuse to be a part of a prayer because of the word that somebody said, because there's non-Church of Christ people or non-Christians in that room. So they don't want to be, because it says we shouldn't, socialize with these people. We shouldn't, and so they take these things out of context. And I think as Christians, we really have to examine the way we look at the other Christians in this room and the non-Christians out there, because again, we are supposed to be ministers to those people.
Yes.
And we should be inviting them, not judging them and chasing them away.
Absolutely. In Jesus' examination of these guys, what should I be doing? I should be examining myself when I read this. Oh, am I like this? Do we have leaders in the church? Do we give them too much credence sometimes? Now, here's an example. And I'm not saying you shouldn't respect the Lord's shepherds. You better respect the Lord's shepherds. I'm not saying you shouldn't respect the Lord's deacons. You better respect the Lord's deacons. But it's just like when I was in the military. When you salute, who do you salute? You salute the rank. If it's an officer above you, you better salute him. It doesn't matter what you think of him. You better salute him because that rank demands that salute. However, you're in a group of Christians, and there's a preacher there, and there's a couple of other guys there. Say, hi, these are my buddies, Fred, Bill, George, John, and Brother Marty. What have you just done? You just gave me a title. Why did you give me a title? Am I your brother? Well, yes, I'm your brother. It's not wrong to call me your brother, but in using brother in that context, you've set me above everybody else. You set me apart. Am I apart from John, Bill, George, and Ringo, and all the other guys in the band? No, we're all the same. And that's what Jesus is getting at. We're all the same. God may have gifted you with whatever you need to be a leader, but that's so you can help people come to Christ. That's so you can bring people into the presence of God and His glory and show them His word and His will. That doesn't mean you're better than anybody else or to be exalted more than anybody else. What should be respected in the Lord's leaders is their ability to lead you to God. That's it. I think that's what he's talking about. And when we read this, we better make sure we're applying this, because like Tom said, it's easy for us to look at this and go, oh, those guys. Oh. But this is here for me today, so I can look at myself and go, am I being a hypocrite? What am I doing with my position in the Lord's church? And you have a position in the Lord's church. You are part of a royal priesthood, according to Jesus' Apostle Peter. What are you doing with your royal priesthood? I mean, it's easy to look at elders. By the way, what are some of the what are the words the New Testament uses for an elder? Shepherd. Why does he use the word shepherd? That's what we're supposed to be doing, shepherding the sheep. What's another word for elders? What's that? Presbyter. What does the word presbyter mean? It's just the word that means elder. That's all that means. So we're looking at somebody who's older. You don't want to get the young guys, the inexperienced guys, the immature guys, and make them elders. No, you don't do that. Overseer, the Greek word episkopos, looking over. What's an elder supposed to be doing if he is an episkopos, if he's a bishop? That's where we get the word bishop, bishkop. It's a transliteration of episkopos. We're supposed to be looking over the church, paying attention. If you're a shepherd, you better be paying attention, because every shepherd's going to have to do what? That's the scariest passage for me, and I know it is for 5 other guys. We're going to have to give an account for the sheep. So when you look at your phone and, oh, one of the shepherds have called me, we're not trying to bug you, although we really love it. We love bugging you. We love irritating people. That's why we became shepherds in the first place. And now I get to call people and harass them about not coming to church and not being spiritual and about all their bad habits. Woohoo! This is so much fun. I can't wait to tell all the young guys at church, you need to aspire to be an elder so you can harass people on the phone and go knock on their doors and I'm coming after you. I'm glad you're giggling. But you don't do it for glory unless it's God's. And you don't respect an elder for glory unless it's God's. It's got to be done. What was Jesus doing here? What was he calling these guys? You hypocrites, you brood of vipers, you whitewashed tombs. Oh, you're good looking on the outside, but you're full of dead men's bones. I read what he has preached here, and I read what John the Baptist said, and I look at my own sermons and I go, wow, Marty, am I doing enough of that? And I don't know. Charles?
I used to wonder why he was so mean to the scribes and Pharisees and why he was so nice to tax collectors and prostitutes. And I think it's because he appreciates people who admit they're sinners.
Yes.
He was nicer to the people who knew they were sinners and admitted it than he was to the people who thought they were almost above the law.
Yes, and he used those guys, those girls, he used them as examples of how we're supposed to be. When he talked about those 2 men who went to the temple to pray, you remember? One was a Pharisee. What did the Pharisee do? He said, oh, Lord, you're lucky to have me, man. I fast twice a week. I give alms to the poor. I do all these great things. I got a horn here. See if I can toot it. Oh, I've been tooting it this whole time. Yeah, Lord, you're lucky to have me. What'd the publican do? He wouldn't even look up. But he looked down, hit himself in the chest, and what was his prayer? Be merciful to me, a sinner. There's the lesson. That's the lesson here in chapter 23. Jesus wasn't trying to be ugly and hateful. He was exposing them for who they were. If they were honest, what would they have said to Jesus? Thank you. I never realized this about myself until now. That's what they should have said. How many bells have we had? Had to ask, didn't I? All right, well, this brings us to chapter 24. Lord bless you.